Welcome everyone to our first collaboration and our first labor organizing training with DSA and union members. We have a couple unions here today. We got the NFFE, we got the AFGE, 5051 Idaho, and Boise DSA here today. All right, who are we? Well, first of all, my name's Nolan. I'm part of the DSA. We have a co-presenters here today that will be speaking. We have Sam, we got Spencer, and we have Isaiah. All DSA folks that came out helped make this whole thing happen, so really couldn't do it without them. And we have some lovely union members that decided to take some time out of their day to come collaborate, speak on their experiences. First off, Adam, Carol, and finally Cameron. So we really appreciate them all coming out, taking time out of their day. We really appreciate you guys all coming out. I think this is very important. Let's start off with what's your guys' workplace looking like? From all the people that we've heard today, I appreciate you guys all speaking, but we can hear there's always problems at every workplace. And the thing that I hear the most is that you don't feel stability. Maybe I'm wrong on this, but a lot of places with long-term workplaces, they feel like they don't have control, they don't feel like they have agency, and they feel like they're at the whims of whoever their boss is, which isn't the way it should be. You're doing the work, you deserve to have that control over that. And I believe today, hopefully, we give you the tools and the knowledge and the power to actually claw back that power that you deserve. Now to introduce our next speaker, Cameron.
Okay, so yeah, what is a union? Good question. That's why we're here. It's a group of coworkers which organizes a collective to bargain with their boss and build power. And so how that basically can work in our workspaces is, you guys just meet up and say, hey, we want to collectively talk to management and stuff like that. Once you have that power, and there's a lot of legal protections with this in the federal government, supposed to be. So when you talk about all those things and you sign all that paperwork, that gives your union, who is just someone that you work with usually, and that's what it should be. It shouldn't be some third-party person. It should be someone who's in your workplace and things like that. And then once that person has that kind of legal ability to speak for everyone, then it gives that more ability to bargain and everything. So benefits of a union. Union workers on average can earn $10,000 more than their non-union counterparts. That's according to a study that was done in 2024. Better benefits, seat at the table with management, like I said. Unions can file grievances on your behalf. So if you have a collective bargaining agreement, that's kind of like the Bible between the workforce and management. If you have a collective bargaining agreement that says something that you need to have 2 15-minute breaks every shift and you're not getting those, then it's up to the union to file grievances on your behalf to enforce the contract to make sure that everyone's getting those breaks and everything like that. Whereas if you're not in a union place, it's basically just asking, hey, can I have that? Wine garden rights, that was a right given to union members from a court case, I don't know, I think it was 25 years ago, from a lady named Weingarten, that's her last name. And so basically it gives you the right to a representative whenever you are in a meeting with management that you feel that you could get punished for, or if they're gonna think there's an investigation or anything like that. And so you can say, hey, I want to do my Weingarten rights and I want to have a union representative in here. And they, for the most part, have to stop that meeting and wait until they can get someone into there with you. And that's always good because the union representative can kind of talk to you beforehand and try to make a game plan. This happens with me a lot, where people come to me who have a meeting with management and they are very fired up, they're passionate because it's their job, their issues going on. And so they go, I'm not gonna talk, I'm just gonna let you speak for me. And then so that way, you can have that level-headedness and you're not digging yourself a deeper hole. So that's always good too, because it just protects you in those meetings where you have those extra witnesses. Because if it's just you and a manager, they could kind of bully you or say things that isn't correct. But then when you come in as that representative, they usually bring another member too. So now there's 4 people in this room and everyone has to kind of be on their best behavior at that point. Worker power. It's just hard standing up by yourself, in a workspace. When you have all these other people with you, it protects you, it makes you feel more empowered. It gives you the ability to make asks that you could not ask without those powers and stuff like that. So.
Okay, so we have this first picture here that these are 3 examples of successful unions and 3 big examples of how labor unions are growing. In this first picture, we have these red state teacher strikes in West Virginia, Oklahoma, and Arizona. These are technically illegal rank and file strikes in this first picture. They won thousands of dollars in raises and millions in funding.
If anyone in here is familiar with Jane McLevy, she is a lifelong labor organizer who passed away last year, but she's personally a hero and an inspiration of mine and has produced a lot of work on labor organizing theory. If I'm not mistaken, she helped lead at least one of these, or at least was influential in their development. And I do just want to point out a couple of points here. First of all, the fact that if the strikes themselves weren't illegal, collective bargaining on the part of public employees was, from my understanding. And if you know the history of unions, and Adam might get into this later on, legality has not, for decades, has not always been on the side of labor organizing. There are very powerful interests which are vehemently opposed to workers organizing, taking some power into our hands. And so, despite that barrier happening in, again, a very red state in Virginia, or rather in West Virginia, Oklahoma, and Arizona, I think this is an example of what Jane McLevy's supermajority, militant rank and file style organizing can achieve.
We have, in the second picture, there's corruption, stagnation, and UAW. So they fought against corruption, stagnation, and the UAW, which is, UAW is the United Auto
Workers.
Yeah, that's right. They formed a reform caucus for a greater rank and file democracy, which means that they made their union more democratic. So they, correct me if I'm wrong, after they successfully unionized, they also helped bolster their union and make it more...
Yeah, no, democratic's the right word. There had been a big Department of Justice investigation, I think just about immediately prior to United Auto Workers for Democracy, this reform caucus being formed. And especially if anyone here pays close attention to national labor news, there was just some unfortunate news about this reform caucus. I think it's been shut down partially, or they're transitioning. They're facing challenges in this effort to democratize this union. So obviously, like the UAW, there are a number of other big national unions that we'll be discussing. Forming a union isn't the end of the struggle, right? It doesn't mean that your workplace won't have issues. It doesn't mean that there aren't dynamics and political issues in unions that you have to work for. Right, and we'll talk a little bit about the politics of unionism towards the end of the presentation, but I just want everyone to be aware that, and maybe I'm mostly speaking for myself here, but I very much think that unionism is a culture, it's a spirit, it's something you have to develop and sort of, cultivate very, very carefully, and it isn't a simple one and done thing. So if you want to begin developing a strong labor movement, which again we're going to talk about later, that's something that's going to take a lot of work and a lot of very deep change, because it's not something that we're used to.
So this is our most recent example in the third picture. This was in May 2025, so a few months ago. It's in Fairfax County, Virginia. So the SEIU organized drive. They organized over 20,000 workers in Fairfax County, Virginia. This is super impressive because Virginia is obviously a red state, and they dealt with a lot of major union busting. And within that, they overcame union busting. Usually, it can end something like that. So the fact that they overcame that is why they're on our slide. It's great. It's a great accomplishment.
Part of the Fairfax County, Virginia, and I think I had my facts mixed up. There was a ban on collective bargaining for public employees in Fairfax, Virginia, I believe, and that was a victory of the union drive, was essentially overcoming that. Also, just to finish the point regarding the UAW, there was a reform effort back in 2023. There was a successful election in which the Reform Caucus essentially did win national leadership. And as I alluded to with the news that just came out, there were flaws, there were imperfections and problems with that effort. But one of the things that effort arguably produced was the Big Three strike. If you pay any attention at all to national labor news, you probably heard about that, where they struck against the Big Three automakers. In what was, I would say, arguably a very successful strike. They won a 25% raise over 4.5 years. They won back cost of living adjustments and a number of other wins. Unfortunately, many of those wins were clawing back sort of deteriorations in the quality of work that had been occurring for decades and years, as unsurprisingly, but nonetheless, that strike did allow them to win some of those gains back. And of course, we saw a wave of new organizing come out of that strike as well.
I'm just gonna really quick try and consolidate like 400 years of working people's movement into 5 minutes or so. People have been fighting back against the powers that be since the first enslaved people were brought to this, what is now this country, in 1619. And the push was ongoing. What we now refer to, what we now think of as labor unions, started to kind of come in the mid 1800s. There was a big push in 1848, kind of a lot of these movements in the late 1800s. There was the big fight for the weekend and the 8-hour workday. We think this like movement is hard work now, and it really is, but remember that there was like bloody violence and that people died to bring us literally the weekend, to any time off of work. That's how long this fight has been going on, and it's continuing. The early 1900s, there was another big push. There was a lot of change in the way that we view unions and union power, and there was a lot more working class power that came from that, which, and we'll look at this in the next slide, but which brings us to the 1950s, which was arguably the peak of worker power in this country. That's when the unions were the strongest. There was a big push. Broadly, I think 1 out of every 3 working Americans was in a union at that time, and even in Idaho as well in the 50s, so union density, so 1 out of every 4 in Idaho was in a union. That also is really indicative of where we're at now and how far that we've come. So there's a lot of reasons for that decline since the 1950s. Yeah, you can see a huge buildup in the 30s and 40s. That was working people across the country getting together and organizing and finding things in common instead of what brings us apart. And you can see here in the middle, that's basically big money finding themselves, changing the narrative, attacks on unions in the media, changing culture within unions themselves. So there was a slow transition from democratic power within unions, like we're talking about with the UAW, to the union becoming more of like a service provider. So we get you better benefit, you pay your dues and we'll get you better benefits, and you don't have to worry about anything else. That runs counter to what was happening in these years of building worker power. That's when like people like us, all of us, we're the ones putting in the effort every single day. And so that's what we need to get back to, and that's what people in the 2020s are like slowly realizing, that this power has to come from the bottom, and that's hopefully what we're going to be building here today.
So there's various misunderstandings people have about some of the things involving unions. The first one is, what is right to work? So right to work states, about 28 states are right to work states, and it doesn't mean you can't join a union. What it means is you have to opt in to paying dues and paying union fees, basically. So in non-right to work states, so when I was like a teacher in another life, I was in Ohio, was not a right to work state yet. And during that time, even if I didn't even know about how to join the union, didn't even think about it, they were taking out a certain fee as basically a representation fee. They're like, we're doing this work for you. We've got people doing negotiations, so they just took out a fee. But 28 states now make that illegal. Like they just don't do it. You have to completely opt in to unions, and you have to opt in to getting dues. So dues are basically what you're paying to the unions, so that the union can help provide those services. In our state, for example, you could be like, well, do I need to pay dues? I'm already getting the benefits. But of course, if everybody said that, then there would just literally be nothing. Those dues help provide for things like lawyers. Like in our union right now, those dues are helping keep the country together because they got all these lawyers on all these court cases that are like slowing things down, what they're trying to do. Some people might think, well, it's a whole third party and it's not us at all. It's not us and the bosses. But the union is the us. It is all of the employees, all of your coworkers. They just have people who are also professionals at understanding how this works. So you can have some advisors, but they're not really a third party in the negotiations. They're just helping you out. It is not so if you sign up to join a union, it's not an inescapable contract. You can leave if you wanted to fill out the paperwork. You shouldn't, but you could if you wanted to. If you're allowed to collectively bargain, those are contracts. But that's a different thing entirely. For you yourself, it is not like you're signing your life away on a dotted line. So
we've talked a little bit about what unions are. We've talked about your guys' experiences with your workplace, why unions are necessary, and the kinds of wins that they're able to accomplish. So now we're going to talk about how do we build those unions. And for that, we have a lot to thank to the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee, which they are a DSA project. It's a network of activists. It's a network of activists and union members that they support labor unions, and they put on trainings for creating labor unions. And so we're going to go through some lessons from the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee. And so we're going to be talking about the organizing committee model, which the organizing committee is the group that sort of creates the union. We're going to be talking about the organizing conversation, which is how you talk to your coworkers to establish that union. Taking collective action and escalating. How do you interact with your bosses to get the wins that you want? And inoculation to boss campaign, which is basically preparing your coworkers for the retaliation that's going to come for your boss. So first, for the organizing committee. So what is an organizing committee? It's a group of coworkers that lead the unionization campaign. And so they do the work of establishing the union. And so what they're responsible for is they create a list of all the workers that are in the union and in the workplace. They map the relationships between those coworkers, and they power map, which means they talk about who has power over who are the bosses, who has the ability to hire and fire, who makes the schedules, etc. They build support for the union among the coworkers. They have those conversations and talk to people and tell them why they need a union, why they should join the union. They help their coworkers overcome fear, as we talked about. That's what's called inoculation. The boss is going to retaliate. The organizing committee knows that, and so they have to prepare their coworkers for that, so that builds a strong union, so everyone's prepared for the retaliation from the boss. And they also develop new leaders. The organizing committee is going to start off very small. You need to talk to your coworkers and find out who are the leaders in this workspace, who are the charismatic people, who are the good workers, who has good relationships with a lot of people in the workplace. And you need to develop those people into leaders of the union. And they're also finally going to be collecting signatures for drives. So when you need to get a union election, that's going to take signatures from many people in your workplace, and it's the organizing committee that's going to get those signatures. And same things for once the union is together, you need to authorize strikes if you're ready to do that. And that takes the organizing committee going out and getting signatures from the workers. Who is the organizing committee? The organizing committee are people in your workplace who they should be doing the work of the union, like we talked about in the last slide. They should be strong leaders. They should be charismatic. They should have relationships with people in the workplace. They should know the different worker cliques and the different departments. They should be representative of the different departments, different shifts, and just the general diversity of the workplace in terms of like everything from the shifts in the departments, but also like racial diversity, sex diversity, all that sort of stuff. And they should be ready for change. They should be ready and willing to bring this union to something that's ready to get workers what they deserve.
I'm just going to walk through what that election process looks like real quick once you get to that point. Once you've built your organizing committee, you've committed a majority of people to it, and what that process looks like. A real quick note, there's two major pieces of legislation in the US for labor law. The NLRB, National Labor Relations Board, supervises elections across every private industry job and company, as well as postal workers. And then there's the FLRA, Federal Labor Relations Act, which does the same thing, but for all federal workers besides postal workers. So that's where the three of us that are here today, we're represented under, or our elections would be under the FLRA. But do know that there's two major pieces of labor legislation. So what Spencer was talking about with collecting signatures, so you need to get from everybody in the workplace a minimum of 30%. What you really want is 60 to 80%. That's guaranteeing that even if you don't get as many as you think you're going to get, that you'll still be well on the way to success. That is also with the understanding that as soon as this goes public, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, as soon as this goes public, it is very likely that management will be pushing back against you. will be pushing back against the unionization process. They will do lots of illegal stuff that they're not allowed to do by the law, but the punishments for those things are so minimal that they just do them anyways. Amazon and Starbucks have been union busting for years now. And so when you have that higher goal, that means that your goal is acknowledging that part of this process is not just like getting names on a piece of paper, but like building solidarity with each other, so that you will be more immune to those attacks from the boss. Then you submit your petition to the NLRB, and then it goes into the like legal process. So then after you submit that petition, a vote will be held. And so the National Labor Relations Board holds that vote among everybody in the company that you're working for. And then it doesn't matter how many people vote, but the majority of the people who do vote need to vote in favor of the union. So again, that's why that higher goal is so important. And then also an important note is deciding if and how and with whom to affiliate. So Cameron's gonna talk about the many different unions that are out there. So at some point in the process, you're gonna start having to have conversations, both within your workplace and with the potential unions that you might be trying to join. So there's lots of different unions, and they represent different types of people and different types of industries, but that will be a step in the process as well for you.
These are a lot of the national unions around the world, actually. So if you are someone who is trying to unionize your workplace, the best thing to do is find out what people in that workspace, where they've unionized across the country. You know, so like we've heard a lot of like semiconductors or teachers or, parapros and things like that. You can look up just that name. We just look up like, semiconductor union, and find out who is either trying to get into that space or who is already in that space. And so if you look over here, we have, it's kind of hard to tell, but there's this one, which is the National Treasury Employees Union. They do like the IRS and some other federal jobs. There's the UFCW.
American Food and Retail Union.
Yep. They have the Albertsons in Boise, so they do them. There's the National Education Association. They do teachers. UA, plumbers, I think. AFSCME, American Federation. Yeah.
Municipal workers.
Yes, they're state and like local.
County?
State, county, municipal. Thank you. Thanks, team. Look at us. That's a union right there. It's really important right now with Starbucks because they're trying to, pick it and do all this stuff. But if you notice, their union actually has their workplace name in it, which is kind of abnormal if you look around at all these other ones. It's just kind of weird that they have Starbucks Workers United. I'm going on a rabbit hole, but I was looking at their website and they have merch. And they have Starbucks in their merch, so I'm like, are you paying money to Starbucks to? This doesn't make sense to me. But then the United Steelworkers, we got Teamsters, UAW, electricians, IATSE, they're actors and pretty much anyone that works at movies. Service employees, International, NIFI, that's those guys. Oh, and this is me, the American Federation of Government Employees. And so in all of these unions, they have like a national union. So like there's the national Teamsters, and then they break down lower all the way down to your workplace. For example, I'll give you how it works at my place. We have AFG 1127. So every local is going to have a number, and that's kind of your team name. I don't know, was anyone in fraternities or sororities in college? This is the easiest way to describe it. It's kind of silly. Because these are all just gibberish and gobbledygook to people. But the American Federation of Government Employees Local 1127 is in 6 states. Idaho is one of them. They are in a region 11 of AFGE Council 100, which is the TSA National Local. And then they are all go to AFG Nationals, so it's kind of like, I don't know, locals, counties, teams, states, whatever. So that makes it so you have more agency and control in your workplace, and you have those e-board meetings and all those conversations wherever your local is. And generally, my local is pretty abnormal because it's 6 states. That doesn't seem local to me. But like a lot of them, the locals will be, it could be one building, like the Boise VA. They're just in Idaho. So if you are interested in organizing at your workplace, you would want to kind of get with one of these places, because all of these people, they have professional organizers that your union dues go towards to help organize more people, because you have to just keep growing. That's, you know, I guess how capitalism works. But yeah, so you have to just keep organizing. And so like, it's hard when it's just you saying, I want to unionize, because you have so much stuff going against you. But then if you go, hey, Teamsters, you know, I want to organize my vape shop. You know, like, hey, we actually have other vape shops that are organized. We'll send some of those people down there. You know, they'll have conversations with you guys. And then that way it doesn't look like it's you. It looks like these other people. And they can take the brunt from management, do all those things. And they have the finances and the resources to help with that. It's not just you, there's all these groups that can help you and protect you and push forward. So that's what I recommend the most. And I think that's what happened with Starbucks, is they were trying with someone else and it might not have worked. So they're pretty abnormal and it was kind of cool. Sam, you said like labor is just like a state of mind. And I think it really is, once you start realizing, like I took a labor history class at a labor training that I went to, and it felt like a whole different history of the United States. You know, you find out of all these different like literal battles that took place where like people were fighting, just for an 8-hour workday.
Stuff like Blair Mountain.
Exactly, you know, where they're literally dropping bombs on people. Even in the state of Idaho, you know, this was a very union friendly and strong state for a long time when it was first founded. And so, does everyone know what the Pinkertons are? Like, that is basically a paramilitary group that was like created to fight unions. And when you think about that, unions are just people, you know, us, you know, the working class. And so when you realize that there's this basically war, it feels like, on the working class, and it's been going on for the whole time the United States has been around, it kind of changes. I don't know, it's like taking is it the red pill you take in the Matrix?
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
You take both
Is it
pills.
the blue one?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, there's a lot of cool things you can read and stuff about that, and talking about it is, I think, really important. Talking with your friends, your coworkers, anybody, talking about the importance of worker solidarity, class solidarity, all those different things. It's just very important. People are gonna say, oh, times are good, I don't need to unionize. But they might say on the opposite, times are bad, we don't need to unionize because, you know, stability and all that stuff. So no matter what, there's always gonna be a reason to not. People are always gonna be giving those roadblocks and everything like that. So you just have to focus on the positives and just keep pushing forward that way. So we're just always at risk in these jobs. You know, when you're not in a union, you know, you're at risk for things. And then when you're trying to start a union, you're gonna be at risk. And then even when you are in a union, you know, in my position, I am in more risk with my job because I'm forward facing and do all these different things. You know, a lot of people in their job say, you know, I want to keep my head down and just be survival mode and stuff like that. So I'm doing all these different things. You know, most labor union people are doing this thing where like you're putting yourself out there. You're having meetings with the management that you don't want to have, you know, you're having confrontations with them that could affect you, you know, in the future and stuff. So I think a lot of people sacrifice a little bit, but then hopefully it makes it better for everybody at the end.
Okay, so we talked about this like organizing committee model, what that organizing committee looks like, that we need to have these conversations with our fellow coworkers. We're gonna get into the specifics of what those conversations look like. But the first and most important thing as an organizer is building relationships in the workplace, in your communities, broadly, but like specifically when you're trying to start a union in your workplace. The first step to doing that is just to be an excellent worker. Know the work that you're doing. Don't just start preaching at people as soon as you are starting there, but be a good worker. Don't like get a target on your back from the boss. Like ideally the bosses like you or at least respect you. Building that sense of trust and mutual respect with your coworkers. You don't have to be friends with everybody in the workplace. You do have to build a level of respect with them. And so the importance of that, like Spencer was talking about with the representative coalition of the organizing committee, is you as one of the early people on that organizing committee needs to be reaching out across shifts, across departments, across social circles within the workplace. And also before you are diving into these like very explicit organizing conversations, you could be setting up just casual one-on-ones. It doesn't have to be complicated. Just grab a coffee after work with one of your coworkers that you haven't spent much time with. Just get to know them as a human and as a fellow worker. And in those conversations, a lot will be gleaned from what their experiences are in the workplace and what you share with them. I think you will often be surprised how much you have in common with people that you aren't necessarily close with in the workplace. The biggest part of this whole conversation also, and this will be an ongoing theme, is what we call the 80-20 rule. So you're not preaching at people. You're not like dumping political theory on people as soon as you meet them. You are listening to their story. You're listening to their life experience. You're listening to what their experiences are in the workplace. So you're listening. 20% of the time you're talking, you're being an engaged listener. You're asking pertinent and related questions, but 80% of the time, you're just letting them talk.
The organizing conversation, and I should preface this by saying I have very, very limited experience labor organizing. I have a little bit more experience doing tenant organizing. For those who missed it, I'm going to do a shameless plug. Treasure Valley Tenants Union, which is your regional tenants union, recently launched the first supermajority fighting tenants union, and I just want you to know, first of many. I just want you to know that there's massive crossover. There's obviously differences. There's a ton of crossover. So many of the folks in this room have been using this practice. I'm sure our labor union folks have with some success recently. So the organizing conversation is really the fundamental unit of organizing, right? If you can't get with your fellow workers, your fellow tenants, and talk to them about the issues that you're experiencing, you aren't going to get anywhere. And this is a conversation that maps very, very well onto a door conversation. So if you're doing tenant organizing, you go out to an apartment building and you just kind of replicate the same conversation at every door, right? Labor is obviously different. Like Adam was saying, it can be more casual. You just have to build some social capital, see where you fit. It's a lot more flexible. And I also say that coming from a place of relative ignorance. Maybe some of the labor union folks have something to add on that front. But the general broad strokes are more or less the same. So introduction, you want to be personable, like Adam said, you want to have a natural connection, be authentic, just because, and this is something where I think universally, if you're unfamiliar with organizing or are a little bit uncomfortable with the idea, you might feel like you're putting on a mask, right, when you're organizing or, having a conversation with a goal. But I would just encourage you to keep in mind that this isn't about you pulling one over on your coworkers. It isn't about you having some secret agenda. It's about you trying to get to a point where you and your coworkers have better lives. So it's worth it. So introduction, be personable, build some kind of initial relationship, and then you're gonna want to get the issues, right? Whether that's in one conversation or many conversations or a meeting, you need to understand people's issues. You need to understand what moves people. That will often surprise you, right? Your issues are not your coworkers' issues. And while there are a number of very big issues in a workplace which will likely draw people into the union, everyone has their individual reasons for joining. So you need to be very cognizant of that, be empathetic and understanding. Don't talk down to people because of their problems or their conception of their problems, nothing like that. And this is where I think most of the work ends up happening. This and agitation, because again, that having issues, articulating them. For example, in tenant organizing all the time, we say, there was a rent hike, we talk about the rent hike, and then we ask, how has that affected you? What is different about your life because your landlord is taking 40% more in rent every month, right? So similarly, you want to actually engage your coworkers, get them to think about the issues, let them understand how that's affecting them, encourage them to think about it, talk about it, relate to them, and then point your finger in the right direction. It isn't a fluke that causes the poor staffing and the bad management and the low wages, right? It's a function of your boss's interest and the disparity, and I think I would say fundamental antagonism between your boss's interests, the owner's interests, and the worker's interests, right? For profits to rise, labor production can't rise, at least not in proportion, right? Or the wages returned to workers can't rise in proportion with the rise of the value that labor is producing. That graph that Adam had, I believe maybe it's a different graph I'm thinking of, but you've probably seen it, the one where maybe through the 40s, 50s, and 60s, there was a linear relationship between wages and productivity in the workplace. For the past 50 years, that isn't how it's been, right? There's been a massive divergence. And so bosses are taking more and giving less back, right? So you need to agitate around that, get people to understand that they can take power, right? They can change the conditions of their lives, but before they do that, they need to understand why their lives are the way they are. And so this is really important, right? Anyone can get angry. I think we all know someone in our life who likes to complain, right? And is like actually that version of complaining that's maybe disempowering or is really negative, hard to be around. And in the absence of an alternative, I think most people in our culture don't want to complain, right? You just stick to it, like keep your head down, just do the stuff. That's life. Shit happens. But when there is an alternative, when there is a path forward for something better, that's when people's agitation and that anger that they've normalized or suppressed, but is there almost always, in my experience, that anger can finally find a voice. What we say all the time in tenant organizing is we're seeking to move people from fear to anger to hope and then action. And how do you get someone who's angry to feel some hope? You present them with a plan to win, right? How do we win? How do we actually put pressure on the boss, bring them to the bargaining table, and fight for collective demands? There are a number of ways of doing this. We'll talk about it in detail, I think, in the next slide or a little bit later. There's pre-majority tactics. So this is very important in labor, in my, again, limited experience. If you kind of think we can't do anything until the union starts, we can't put pressure, we haven't had an election that this legally established body said, okay, you're good now, you get to, fight for your basic rights. If that's your mindset, you're crippling yourself, right? You're saying we aren't going to put any pressure on the boss in order to win that majority. And as union folks here today have said, union busting doesn't start necessarily at the election. If that's when it starts, you did a really good job of keeping things under wrap. Union busting, I think for most major workplaces, is constant. Like it's happening right now. We'll talk about pre-majority tactics, but it's important to appreciate that you can put pressure on the boss from the get-go. And then of course there are majority union tactics, right? So giving people examples like we discussed, the red state teacher strikes, which involved so many workers, rank and file workers, doing something technically illegal. Basically appealing to examples of worker power regardless of the rules can be a good move. We talked a little bit about risk before. Inoculation is a term, again, used in tenant organizing and labor organizing a lot. That is the process of preparing your coworker for retaliation. I think a slightly better way of putting this is actually providing your coworkers with the information to make an informed decision, right? Again, this is not about you, let me manipulate my coworkers and turn them into pawns in this union campaign so that I can take all the dues and buy a Bugatti, right? Like that's the opposite of what we're trying to do. So you want to give your coworkers all the information. The boss might retaliate. He also might give you some carrots, right? He might try to buy people off. He might try to break unity. That's not only good for treating your coworkers as the peers they are, it's good because your union campaign is going to be very, very weak if no one's expecting retaliation and no one understands how the boss might react. A final thought on that point is, and again, we do this in tenant organizing to great effect, in my opinion. It's one thing to go through this thing like, okay, some unions get a lot of cool stuff. We're gonna do that, form a union. Here's the process. There's some tactics we can do. The boss might retaliate. You don't just, preach, you don't lecture people. You wanna get people to engage, right? There's a social relationship here. Workers and our bosses. We need to think about that as workers if we want this union campaign, and the union after the campaign to be something we can turn into a weapon of our collective democratic will. And so, I'm imagining myself at a door, but you can imagine saying this with your coworker, be like, yeah, how do you think the boss might react? Like if we try to unionize, right? I think most of the people in this room would say, well, they probably wouldn't like that very much. Well, why not, right? And can I actually get someone, like why doesn't your boss want you to form a union?
Because then he has less power to exploit the people under his power to whatever one he needs.
Yeah, and fundamentally, we talked about those divergent interests. Bosses, owners, businesses, they want profits. They want higher profits. Higher profits made possible through your labor. What we say all the time in TVTU is, landlords, bosses, owners want two things. They want control and they want profit. They want profit because that is the entire purpose of their business operation. And they want control because if they can't control you, they can't exploit you, they can't, lower your wages or keep them suppressed. So that's perfect. Calling the question or making the ask. So again, with labor, maybe it's more flexible. Maybe you don't make an ask every single time you chat about the workplace with your worker, but it's extremely important that you get comfortable with the idea of making an ask. Nothing happens unless you do this, right? You can't just talk shit, talk about the shop, and then magically have 500 people marching in your workplace. You have to make asks. You have to constantly test who's willing to take what action, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like.
So there's a kind of a structure that people follow while you're organizing a workplace. The first stop is going to be identifying your leaders, who are maybe not who you think they are. You need to find out who's going to be that person who's really good at rallying people together, like bringing people together and able to communicate really well. Sometimes the leader is not starting out to be the most enthusiastic person or the idea person, like the person who's like, oh, we have to do this, we need to organize. The leader is someone who's going to be really good at bringing people together. You might be the idea person who wants to organize, and you might need to convince somebody to become a leader, basically. Obviously, that person will be on the organizing committee once it's together, so will the idea people and the enthusiastic people, etc. So you need to find all those different kind of important positions to start the organizing process with your committee. Once you have your committee together, everybody in your committee starts making pitches to everybody to get them to sign the petition. So you'll have a petition where we said 70 to 80% is really a good number to get. So what you do is you tell the people, all right, this is the petition for us to organize, but we won't tell the bosses until we get to this threshold of 75%. So you're not just gonna be, you're not putting your name on something that they're seeing when there's like 3 people on it. So you're waiting until this critical mass is hit so that you're all standing together once they know it's happening, as long as people are good at keeping quiet. Once you get all those signatures signed and you're ready, that's when you'll make the official drop off the petition at the boss's door, and you'll make your election to put together your official union. So it's like once you have that 75% petition signed, and then you can start putting it together. And then once you get it all together, that's when you can really start doing what you started this whole process for. So it's kind of like the basic unionizing structure.
And that last point on the previous slide is one of the most important things: escalation. So you're not gonna walk in and start organizing a union and just like try and get everyone to do a general strike in the entire country the first day that you're there. You're gonna start small. So you're gonna start at the smallest level, and that's why we call pre-majority unionism. So you're taking actions with the plan to be bigger, but you inevitably are starting small. Small and achievable goals, and small things that people aren't like intimidated by. So you really start with the smallest thing, or the biggest thing rather, that you think you'll be able to rally people behind. So something like a shirt day is an easy one. It's like wear blue on Tuesdays or something like that, whatever you want it to be. And that can be, especially if you're giving people free t-shirts, that can be a great way to just like increase some visibility. It's fun for folks. The solidarity is a little more palpable because they're like surrounded by people that are wearing the same t-shirt and they know that they're of the same mind. A walk on the boss can be a pretty empowering tactic. And this can happen at every level. You don't have to march on the CEO. You can just go have a conversation with your immediate supervisor, with like 3 of the people that you work with, to address, and it could be even a small thing. But it's really empowering to go talk to the boss, describe a scenario, bring an ask to the table, and it's something that you'd be bringing to them, something that they have the power to change. And so, like we were saying at the beginning, it can be super intimidating to talk to your boss about stuff and about issues that you have in the workplace. But when you have even just like a few more people along your side, it can be that much more empowering. Like walking on the boss in and of itself could be an escalating campaign, because you could also then, the next time that you go up a supervisory level and bring 3 crews with you or something like that. Then we get into more specific tactics like a slowdown or a work to rule. For example, in the federal sector, we are not legally allowed to strike, but something like work to rule, as I'm sure many of you have experienced, there are rules of ways that you're supposed to do things in the workplace, and then there's how your boss wants you to do things. Usually, they just want more, faster. Work to rule is doing exactly what you're told and exactly what like the employee guidebook says that you're supposed to do. And usually, that ends up slowing things down, because You are, like we all do this every day, we're like taking shortcuts, we know how to be more efficient, but when you're working to rule, you are effectively slowing down the process.
Malicious compliance.
Malicious compliance, exactly. Or walkouts or sickouts, and these are kind of like actions where you've established some power in the workplace, you have a lot of people behind you, you've reached a point in which these more powerful tactics might be something that's worth considering.
All right, so this is when you're ready to really bring it out loud. You're about to go official public, not just, unofficial people know you're working on something. So this is when you get everybody's signatures to really get the union going. And then you're also gonna start bringing up what it is you wanted to change, right? These grievances are, what are the things that you wanted to change in the workplace? What got everybody to join in the first place, right? What are all the things we're like, we need these managers to be held to certain standards as well, and we would like to have more say on what is happening here at all. Like, instead of just griping amongst yourself, you're telling them what needs to be changed. And once you've gone official, you can also find other ways to bring in outside support. Like, so when people are asking, what are ways that you can help if you're not the member of a unionizable workplace? Well, that's gonna be like, getting information about, say, boycotts, you're gonna have, people will stand with you and support you. Or if you have a picket, that's when you're getting real serious. That's where, people are walking outside with the little signs and not going in. And it's nice to have other people there as well. It doesn't have to just be the employees in that picket, or somebody, brings you pizza, or, whatever. Something to support people, especially if they're a striking office at the time, then they're gonna need some help because they're not working right then.
And these are kind of a continuation of the escalating tactics I was talking about in the last one. But that's when you were kind of reaching an even bigger level. So ideally, you've built this relationship with your coworkers, but also you're building this relationship with other unions within your own union, and that's where this like solidarity, like ideally at the end game, to me, is international worker solidarity. So whatever that looks like, at whatever point you are in your campaign, whatever you can make that look like, often the easiest tact is like within your national union. You'll get support from other people, but you can also be, there's also ways to support other unions as your union, or to garner support. A good example is the Teamsters. Often when there is a location or a company in which the workers are on strike, the Teamsters will refuse to deliver goods. They'll refuse to cross a picket line, which don't ever cross a picket line. And that is another union showing solidarity. There's also solidarity strikes, where if Company A its workers are on strike, Company B is maybe a related industry, or connected in some way, and they are also on strike to show solidarity with the workers at the first company. And these have, we can get really into the nitty-gritty of what the options are here, but there's a lot of different tactics. The UAW, a couple of years ago, with their actions against the Big Three, were doing these like rolling sit-down strikes, where it was not just like the entire workforce stopped working, but they would kind of jump from location to location. So that was a way to be really powerful, where they could shut down certain parts of the industry without having to dedicate all of their resources to an entire workforce shutting down. So a lot of people were still working, but enough people in critical components and like parts of the industry were not working at any given time. And then as soon as management could like rally the forces to fight back against that location, they could go back to work and shut down someplace else. And that was a way to like keep the pressure up and keep it escalating while they were in negotiations against these companies. One thing I'll add about these tactics is that there is no guidebook here. You will always be working. You'll know your industry best. So there'll be, a history of other actions that other people have taken, but you'll know your workplace, your community, your coworkers the best, and that really is like how you will collectively come up with these tactics and a plan to win.
I do want to at least get a couple of responses of anyone. Maybe there's been union busting, before there's been a union effort. Maybe you've talked about it. Maybe you know others who've talked about it. Does anyone have experience union busting? Being fired.
Yes.
That is absolutely the ultimate weapon, and that means your savings getting drained, it means homelessness, it means like the way that we've got things set up right now, that's a profound threat. You know, I don't want to be too like insensitive, or maybe it's inappropriate, but I really do think it's correct to conceptualize your relationship with your boss sometimes as an abusive one, because you have a spectrum of threats. You'll be fired, right? You'll get scheduled less, your wages will get cut, right? You won't get, like, you know, there tend to be nice, good, better shifts to work, or whatever little petty privileges you have will be stripped away. And then we're a family, and we're already doing this, and here's this one little fix, and let me put a Band-Aid over that, right? Yeah, pizza parties, all right? We're about to jump into inoculation and the struggle between the union and the boss campaign, but these are some things that, yeah, you either, I'm sure, have or will hear. Kind of already said this, but bosses don't want unions, right? And that's because they care about control of profit. The union directly threatens that. It empowers our collective interests as labor as opposed to their narrow interests as profit makers. Inoculation and the boss campaign. And the way that EWOC presents it, and I think it's useful, is to present the retaliation and the boss campaign as the sort of mirror image of the union campaign. We've talked about how the interests are kind of fundamentally antagonistic, but there's going to be a long-standing campaign by bosses like throughout time. So it isn't just, can the boss stop the election? That might be where it starts, but the boss campaign likely continues until after you have a union. Again, it's just a continuation of this difference of interest. I just want to make that super clear. But as we discussed, in terms of the immediate retaliation that you might see threats of being fired. You might see harassment. Often that's a gendered thing, right? There's sexual harassment that can happen around union campaigns. Jane McLeavy went through some horrific shit while she was organizing. Not getting promotions or raises, being told that you're not going to get those. Captive audience meetings are very, very common. That's where essentially there will be a mandatory or a supposedly optional meeting where you'll be brought in for a union busting session. It's pretty common. And then on the other side, it is important, especially because like these are things you're going to want to bring up in inoculation conversations. There is the carrot, there is the favoritism and the partial wage hikes and targeted promotions. And it's really good to inoculate against this, because if they can't break you through force, right, union busters might fall back on this stuff. And workers who have not only thought through why the boss doesn't want the union, and therefore understand why the union is dependent on unity, right, and solidarity and having strength in numbers, they're much less likely to be willing to undermine, especially if you've led a good campaign, all of their fellow workers and union members. That's where solidarity is just like the central tenet of the union spirit, right? Like if you can't, and this is why, there's so many different ways, I think we're going to talk about a little bit, so many different ways where unions have been degraded, they've been taken down, that could and should be a lecture of its own. Like that solidarity, even though we're starting more or less from a vacuum, 5% of workers in Idaho are union, right? That's tough. That's starting kind of from scratch, right? But you can imagine, we get 5, 10, 15 new shops in related industries in the area. All of a sudden, sure, they might bring in new people and people might scab and they might, launch a campaign against the union, but we've got that many more stores to support it. Briefly wanted to talk about the politics of unionism. This is, again, it can be its own presentation. It's a very complicated thing. I'm sure our union folks can speak to it. There are a few things that I, just speaking for DSA, want to emphasize, because unionism, just like any form of social organization, is not inherently virtuous, right? There can be bad unions. There can be corrupt unions. This is possible. This is happening, has happened. And so I think these values, these politics represent the unionism we want to promote as an organization. I'm sure many, if not all of those with us agree. But this is also something that materially and strategically speaking produces wins. This is something, again, I'll sing her praises again. Jay McLeavy, organizers with the Tenant Union Federation. Every cutting edge, really successful working class organizer that I'm aware of touts things like supermajority organizing, aiming for that 60 to 80%, not just the bare majority, aims for rank and file democracy, right? Rank and file, for those who don't know, that's the general membership of the union. There are all sorts of professional roles, bureaucratic roles that are essential to the function of the union. Pay your dues, but that rank and file being engaged, having democratic decision-making power, and then being drawn increasingly into militant action, right? Collective action at the end of the day is the strength of the union in our eyes. So it's not just here are our principles and, oh my gosh, if your union doesn't have all this perfectly, what the hell, right? This is something that you strive for, it's something you work towards, it's a learning process, but it's also something that we believe is necessary to rebuild the labor movement and to regain everything that we've lost and more. So every worker everywhere, that speaks to this universality of solidarity. Once you start saying, okay, yeah, solidarity for all the workers, but I don't know, Hispanic farm workers, maybe not, right? You're in dangerous territory. Not only are you undermining objectively your strength, where does that stop? So that logic, that exclusionary logic is just antithetical to the labor movement. And as the flip side of that, expansive solidarity is something that we hold very, very dear. It's something that can be challenging to hold here in Idaho in conservative areas, but I would argue that makes it even more important. I hate to fall back on tent organizing because that's where my experience is, but this tenant union we just launched at Riviera Estates, many of the tenants are socially conservative or Trump voters or describe themselves in similar terms. And I'm a socialist with the Democratic Socialists of America. Like, oh, how can we get along? Why haven't we killed each other? It's because we are engaged in a common struggle around expansive solidarity. And on a political level, it hasn't necessarily been an integral part of this one campaign yet, but on a political level, TVTU is very committed to expansive solidarity as a political principle, which I think is also really relevant. Unionism is political. There's a lot of different forms of politics, a lot of different ways you can apply these principles or not apply them, but personally, again, speaking for myself and representing DSA, I can say that we believe that the working class does not just deserve reforms or relief, we deserve power. Our interests deserve to ascend to a place of power. And so that's why we can't hedge on any of these, or we don't want to. So another element, rank and file democracy, a great phrase, I believe also from Jane McLeavy, is you understand to the degree you participate, right? You don't become an amazing, skilled organizer or unionist by just paying your dues. A lot of people do that. I can speak to what Cameron was saying about the average person just kind of showing up, doing what they got to do, but not being, an activist. So that democracy as a principle, it takes a lot of work. It takes more work often to achieve a union's aims in the short term when you're investing in engaging everyone and pulling the rank and file in, but we think that's very important. Again, as it was said before, the union is you. Right? On an individual level, that means each one of us in this room and in our community has a responsibility to organize. Things won't get better until we do. So in a very real sense, the union is you. You have the power to begin changing this landscape that we're all starting from. And that work is starting, whether or not you're part of it yet. And I encourage you to consider joining. But the union is you also in the sense that it should not be a third party. It should be the workers collectively engaging with the boss. Union power is also strike ready. At the end of the day, especially once you have an established sort of institutionalized relationship, it's been a theme in labor history to default to that relationship, right? There are reforms you can get. The contract renewal period rolls around and you have a relationship with management or the boss, and you can squeeze some stuff out. And some kind of, engagement with management and the boss on the part of union representatives is how unions function, right? That isn't a bad thing. But, we talked about like 40s through the 60s, and again, this should be a lecture on its own, but there was a degree to which the strike and the willingness to do things like illegal strikes, to draw on the rank and file and use that power to break an intransigent management that doesn't want to give you anything, that willingness kind of died down. That militancy died down. And we've seen decades and generations of deterioration because of it. So we believe in strike power. Finally, division of labor, or the politics of being an organizer. Very, very briefly, being an organizer, and we've got a slide at the very end about how you can join, how you can contribute to building a labor movement in our area. But being an organizer is tough. Doing tent organizing, which I think is easier than labor organizing, we are doing things multiple evenings a week, right? It's hard, it's difficult. It's sometimes feels like a second job. And I just want everyone in here who's considering or unionizing your own workplace, or coming and being an organizer in whatever capacity you can find, to understand that inoculation, and also to understand that what I'd like to say to you personally is that being an organizer has been the most rewarding experience of the last year of my life. It's not close. To get to know other people with a shared interest, to understand their stories. In the tenant union launch, I had the privilege of working with 5 of our tenant leaders to develop their speeches for the launch. And it was like a therapy session. The emotional sort of intimacy that we were able to reach in that process. So,
well, as you now know, my name is Adam Larson. First and foremost, I'm also a worker. I run a trail crew for the U.S. Forest Service. On my better days, I'm hiking around the trails of mountainous Idaho with a chainsaw. For the last 3-4 years, I've also been the local president of our union. So if he was mentioned, this one right here, we represent a lot of wildland firefighters. Shout out Caleb. And that's the National Federation of Federal Employees. So we represent, our local represents employees on the Boise, the Salmon Chalice, and most recently we organized the Sawtooth National Forest and the Sawtooth National Recreation Area. So that was exciting. I'm also an organizer with the Fun, as are these other folks. So that's the Federal Unionist Network, which has been kind of around for a couple years, but really kicked off this past January, where we realized that the cuts to public services were going to be expansive. The cuts to federal jobs were going to be expansive. And kind of the idea that our working conditions are the conditions of those services that are provided to the public, and also that federal employees are involved in like virtually every aspect of day-to-day life, whether that's like clean air and water, housing, food assistance, disability benefits, social security, recreation in the outdoors, putting out wildfires. Sometimes I talk in front of big crowds, which is something even a year ago, if you'd told me that I'd be doing, I would have told you that that was insane and that would never possibly happen. But I think many of us who've done any of this work, including tenant organizing, will speak to this in that most people who are doing this right now never thought that we'd be the people that were doing it. We just realized that no one else was doing it and that it needed to happen. While that's terrifying, it's also really empowering. One big takeaway that I hope all of you can take away from this as well is that this is like, what Sam said, incredibly empowering work. I too feel like just within the last few years have really been engaging with this work more, and it feels not only super important, but I feel like I've grown a lot in that sense. Also, it's a long, slow game. So don't be hard on yourself if you don't organize your company tomorrow or the next day or the next year. Like we said, like a lot of this is like a long, slow grind of building relationships and interacting with people and building a team and like figuring out the dynamics of that team. And there's ups and downs of it, but I guarantee you it will get better and it will get easier. As you're building this, you'll build a community, like we talked about, of that expansive solidarity around you, and that really takes away, it adds rather to that feeling of empowerment. And then when you do, if you inevitably reach a point where you've been grinding and it's tough, you'll have that like group, that community to fall back on, and that really goes a long way. So when I started, for context, I was really just like voluntold into the president position of my local. And when I started also, there was really just me and one other person that were like doing anything. And it's been really awesome to see folks like Carol, for example, to really step it up and like commit to doing more training and like taking more action. And now it's gone from like 2 people to like a pretty solid core of about a dozen people, and like more like lightly engaged folks around that. And so I constantly have to remind myself that like, though there's still nowhere near enough of us, there are many more of us than there were 3 years ago. And we've gone from what was probably about 9% union density to about 25% in the last 3 years. So 1 out of every 4 workers, 1 out of every 4 employees that we represent are now dues paying members, which is a huge increase. Need it to be 100 though, would be great. Nationally, Fun has kind of taken several paths now. So there's also what we're calling like the policy lab. So with the idea that like the communities and like federal workers on the ground should be dictating policy, not the very highest branches of government, that we actually know the people, we know the work, we know the communities, we're the experts in our field. And so that's kind of like one of the many routes that Federal Unionist Network is working on right now.
I'm a new steward, and so I'm just trying to learn how to do anything, because I don't know, there's a lot of different things, and I feel like I'm not the kind of person that would be good at negotiating. I feel like I would just like fight, not just crying if I'm negotiating. I haven't gotten that far yet, so we'll never know until it happens. So that's one of the things that I'm just trying to learn how to do lately, is how to be a steward. I went to a training. So NEFI is under the bigger IAM, the Aerospace and Mechanics Union, as kind of a support. So they're kind of like, you know, our grandparents now. We weren't always, our union wasn't always part of them, but then we kind of joined with them in the 90s to get a little bit more support. What's cool about them is they have this like training center, and they put on trainings all like throughout the year. So I went to this training, and we were like hanging out with railroad worker union people and stuff. We're just like, they weren't taking the same classes as us, but we were kind of they had like a little bar at the place, and people were hanging out there. Anyway, it's an interesting situation. So we were learning about like all the different union kind of structure and all the different laws that affect our work, and then, you know, kind of how you just do steward activities and all that. It's a lot of things to learn, and I don't know, it's kind of scary. I mean, this is just a part of the training. Was like one of the days our union's president came down to the training center while we were there, and he like hosted an after hours party. And something that I thought was weird was, you know how when people get drunk, they're like, "I love you, man," right? If people are in a union, you like, it's like turned up to 11. It was like, this is insane. Why is everybody just like the bestest friends? We're like, man, this is the.
That's what I'm getting.
It was just something that it was like, wow, this is like, there's just so much where people were just like just like vibing on being together.
Yes.
And it was something that we've lost in it feels like we've lost in the United States. And
Yes.
it's been a fight to try to get us to work together, because we are so individualistic, because we're not used to doing things collectively. So I think it is something, it's just like, we need to help us remember that other people exist in the world and how to interact with them.
So I'm American Federation of Government Employees, Local 1127. I've been a lead transportation security officer in Boise for 4 years. I've been the Idaho vice president for 3 years. And then 2 years ago, I became our legislative and political coordinator. And so these are all things that I've done in my job, in my actual job, and from my union point of view too. So like when I said before, is like you have to be a lawyer, you have to be a politician, you have to be all these different things. This is me doing all those things. This is me on the news. What the hell? I didn't expect that to happen. This is me meeting with the representative from Washington State. That's me with Chandler. He's the Boise VA local president at a rally downtown. You people put together, so thanks. And most importantly, this is me doing my job with some of my coworkers. You know, I think a big important part about being a union representative is that you are on the floor with your coworkers. You are putting the work in. You are not a manager. You are nothing like that. You are just another rank and file person, and that kind of, it garners respect with your coworkers, because it shows that you're not someone that's better than everyone else. You still do all the normal things that everyone has to do during their job. And so that's what I would recommend everyone going forward, moving out into this. Look for jobs that have unions, and try to get onto those union executive boards or any sort of position, because they have a lot of outlets moving forward on what you can do. You know, I've gone to DC 3 times, and I didn't pay a cent to do that. So like during the shutdown, you know, there's a lot of employees that are like, I'm really hurting and I'd love to tell people what's going on. Well, that's what I found solace in being able to do, was that I was able to go on the news and not talk about myself, but talk about what my coworkers were feeling, you know, how they were gonna get evicted, or, you know, someone told me that like, this is the last tank of gas he could get before he ran out of money. And so having all those stories and being able to put those out into the ether is something that the union gives you, gives you that additional voice. I know there's some people that don't have jobs. The painters union in town is actually hiring people for painters at the Micron. You just have to be a member of their union, which guess what? You'll become one. So if anyone wants a job after this, let me know and I can talk to you about that.
I do want to encourage folks real quick, if you would like to sign up to organize your workplace, feel free to scan this QR code real quick. There's going to be another one as well that kind of includes a survey and does ask for your contact info. So only do that if you really want like national EWOC to support you. You can also follow Boise DSA, Idaho 5051, and I'm sorry I didn't have time to get the other handles, but the AFGE Local 1127 and the NFFE. And thank you all so much for being here. You're awesome.